Welcome to Together, the podcast where we teach and guide you in the art and hopefully the daily practice of sacred relationship. We have a couple of special guests on today's episode, Chris Durkee and Sarah Shepard. We're really looking forward to diving into this terrain of yin sex and what that opens up. We're going to break free from this young, masculine, penetrating, friction-based, adrenaline-based form of sexual energy and expressing. And we're going to slow everything down and soften into this topic of yin sex, receivership. So Chris Durkee is a seasoned soul interpreter, transformative energy teacher, and spiritual guide with decades of dedicated practice. And Sarah Shepard is a movement alchemist, a soul embodiment guide with over 18 years of experience teaching women how to reclaim their wild feminine intelligence. Let's get into it. Hello, welcome. We are excited to dive into episode number 2 of the series of toe curling sex series. And on this episode, we have guests.
And we're going to dive into the ecstatic eroticism.
Yeah. And so I already gave you an in-depth intro, but now the personal one, Sarah Shepard and Chris Durkee are friends of ours. And we really love and appreciate the work that they do. I'll speak for myself. There's so many places where we connect in gene keys, and this specific episode going into sexual energies and the difference between yang and yin. And we're really looking forward to just diving into the juice of that terrain.
Yeah, this is coming at the perfect time. They reached out because they have a beautiful offering upcoming and they were orienting us to the topic. And we're like, oh, we literally have been exploring exactly this consciously over the last few months, and orienting our clients around this more and more, which is widening how we see the sexual experience. And, they've been speaking about this yang and yin sex. Our language is looking at the nervous system and seeing where we're in sympathetic arousal with sex versus the parasympathetic, and opening the vista of what can happen in sexual experience. And Mike and I have been playing with this quite a bit and having a lot of fun. And we're excited to dive into deepening into this and bringing all of you along, because this is a topic that comes up a lot in our sessions with couples, which is where the sympathetic sex, the charged sex is sort of falling flat. It's not happening enough. It's not feeling good. Both usually aren't feeling satisfied, but also often in our experience, the women are reporting, it's not feeling good and I'm feeling averse to having sex. And we have noticed that this yin sex, as they're going to speak to, is a game changer and what it opens up for people. And so we invite you, as you're listening and as we introduce our guests, for you to feel into this possibility wherever you're at in your sex life, whether you're single, whether you're in partnership, whether you're having amazing sex, this can open it up into even more amazing sex. Or if you're feeling stuck, this is going to sort of open your mind and your body to so many more possibilities that many of us haven't even known were there, because it's not how we have been taught to think about sex or our bodies or intimacy. And so welcome, Sarah and Chris. We'd love for you to maybe kick us off, one or both of you, is sharing what is yin sex and what has the cultural norm around sex been, which is more this yang focus.
You know what, Chris, I'm going to jump in here and just go from sort of the conversation that when I reached out to Chris about wanting to have more of an exploration of this topic, one of the things that I became aware of was that I had been, as many people will probably resonate with, in this journey of like, well, sex is, if you're having it, that's great. And if you're having it, it's like kissing and then maybe some touch and then maybe oral and then penetration. And then after he comes, it's over. And hopefully I had a good time on that journey. But you know what? We did it and I showed up and it was like pretty good. Sometimes it was great, sometimes not so much, but that became something that was just sort of like, well, that's what I thought it was. That's what I adopted as the journey in my experience. And if it was like really great, it was like twice or longer. Or it just happened to hit me on a day where my hormones were really fantastic and woohoo, like who knew that could happen? I wasn't even in the mood. And it turns out that ended up being a really great experience. And many, many, many women have this similar experience where they're like, well, I feel like it's about them and I have to fit my experience into their experience. And what I've discovered in working with women and what I've discovered in being a woman and having a yoni and also dating women as well as men, that there's so much more available. And so that's sort of been my journey. Now, I've been celibate, as in not sleeping with men, for almost 2 years now. And my whole experience of sexual and sensual awakening has come in that time. And it's a very different journey than I was on. And so I reached out to Chris and I was asking more about this. And he's like, actually, I have lots to share on this. And so we've developed a coaching program and a container and some workshop experiences for people to explore the conversation, because although we love talking about sex often, like in communities where it's like friends get together and we talk about it, so often when it comes to like, well, what if we went into a journey of exploring this a little bit more, most of the time people are like, ooh, yeah, that's intimidating, like that feels really vulnerable. And so I really would like to offer that we could like make it a safe space to look at it from some of the incredible elements that are available for pleasure, for enjoyment, that have to do with like going slower, listening more, not having having an idea of what you suspect it could be, but then also being open to it being so much more than that. And yeah, thanks for being willing, and of course being this person that holds so much knowledge in all of these different areas. And yeah, I'd love to hear your maybe the best place to go is like, what would you describe the yin journey from a man's perspective?
Mm. Mhm. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Mike and Courtney, for having us on. It's wonderful to be here. So maybe we've been using the words yin and yang, so maybe we'd start with some definitions and some terms there. So yang, these are, first of all, they're really forces of life. These are terms derived from the Taoist tradition, so this comes from ancient China. And so yang would include things like, simplified, we could say it's directive or agentic energy. It looks to direct. But you can also see it, and then yin would be receptive. So they're in complement to each other, and that's the classic image of the yin yang symbol. But you can also see it in all kinds of forces or dimensions of life. So daytime is yang, nighttime is yin. Northern hemisphere, summer is yang, winter is yin. Yin is the soil, and yin is nurturing. Yang is growth. So when we start to first see it in, I think, natural processes, it then helps us to start to bridge it to life force as it's expressing in our human beings, namely in the erotic and the sensual and the sexual. So when we've been saying that for the vast majority of the people, and the way Sarah was describing and Mike, the orientation of most people's entrainment has been that sex is oriented to the arousal patterns of a yang partner. And so yang is more fire, yin is more water. Yang is directive, it's more heats up faster. Yin is slower and cooler. So when we have sexual encounters seen in TV and movies and wherever, and in all the sort of pop culture and the music and all the everything is about the yang way of getting into a state of arousal. we lose the possibility of looking at it through the lens of how does a yin actually experience arousal? What is the timing? What is the sense of space? How does that even operate? And it's not a question that's even on people's radars. As Sarah was saying earlier, it's like for a yin person to think through how their sexual experience is supposed to fit inside of someone else's. And how do they get little scraps, or how do they get a little bit of some quasi nourishment, but it's primarily oriented to other. And in this approach, what we're doing is putting the lens and the light on this whole other domain that is otherwise unexplored. So to give maybe a kind of an analogy or a visual for us to help see the difference, I was thinking of this video I saw with a guy who did regenerative agriculture in his yard, and then his neighbor was doing really classic like pesticides, herbicides, like the whole thing. And he's just at a fence in his yard and the neighbor's yard and the two farms and gardens. And he just takes a shovel into the neighbor's yard and pulls up some of the dirt and the soil from the soil that's getting all the chemicals and everything into it. And it's this, nobody needs to be a soil expert. I'm not, to look at it and know that looks unhealthy. It's this like ugly color and it's all crumbly and kind of weird looking and icky. And you just think, ooh, I wouldn't want to eat some tomatoes growing out of that or whatever. And then he takes a shovelful of the dirt that has been intentionally, constantly being oriented to regeneration, to the soil in his regenerative space. And it's this beautiful, deep, rich black, and it's clumpy, and there's worms, and like you can just feel like, oh, this is fertile, this is alive, and something would grow from it, would be really flourishing and really organic and healthy. And so maybe that is an image to think through. Yin sexuality is always thinking about the soil of the sexual experience itself. If it only becomes yang, it becomes extractive. And just like in the agricultural example, then you have to add all these extra chemicals to try to, squeeze the last turnip out, because you're stripping the soil of the fundamental nitrogen and the nutrients that would give it life. Versus his point in the video was that he always thinks about the soil not as an add-on, but as the foundation itself. And literally every act in the gardening is to think about how to recycle nitrogen back into the soil so that it's always fertile. And this is a one way, perhaps analogically, to think about what yin-oriented eroticism and sexuality is about. We're actually constantly thinking about nurturing and enriching the soil of the sexual dance in an individual's life and between individuals. It's not an add-on. It's not an extra. It is the thing itself. And in the example of the pesticides, like analogically, the pesticides and the herbicides, of course, in our world would be things like pornography in this topic, where people need more and more intensified experience just to start feeling something because they're dissociative, and it's become an extractive process. And you're trying to get the last, bit of juice out of something when the juice is actually going away. That's a clue that we actually need an entirely different process that's focused on the soil has been stripped and we need to regenerate the soil. And that's a more slowed down process, as we'll get into.
Chris, this is so beautiful.
Mm.
I love feeling, yeah. And what I just want to speak to there, it reminds me of, and I can feel, we've had women we've worked with where this is true, is what can happen is that our bodies are actually knowing we need the yin. So, we start to have these experiences where it's not the yang, and we're slowing down and we're feeling our feelings and we're noticing more sensation. But then our minds, because we've been taught that's not sexuality, comes in and says, well, now we're not being sexual, now like there's something wrong. And it's, I can't tell you how many times, I'm sure you've both noticed this in your work with people, where what they come with is, I'm not sexual, I'm not having sexual charge, I'm not. But then when you really hear it, when they start to describe what they're feeling, they're actually describing yin, but they have no orientation to that is sexuality. Like sexuality can happen there, and actually there's a wisdom. And I know that was like the turning point in my sexual experience when I was doing deep healing work and I was celibate for a time, was when I realized, oh, all of the feelings and the slowness and the slowing down and just like being with what's here, that's not in the way. That is the way. And that was this whole like, and this is sexuality. And where our culture has really said that's not sexuality, that's actually not part of the sexual experience. And yet our bodies are wise, just like soil. And it's like wanting to go through this like yin regenerative state, right? But then we're sort of fighting it and then labeling, as bad or wrong or, yeah.
Yeah, and then what a perpetuation, when I hear that feminine experience that I've seen in my own journey and for, men that we've supported, is there's so much pressure in that sexual space. And so once the language I use here is feminine and masculine can replace somewhat with yin and yang. If the feminine is having that natural wisdom of an opening, and those tender layers are coming up, but then now all of a sudden that masculine role is like, no, wait a minute, what's going on? Something's wrong. There's a pressure in the nervous system that translate is like, well, don't do that. Like that's where the pinging can happen, is the masculine being like, well, now I'm feeling shame because why all of a sudden are you crying, or why all of a sudden are you contracting or pulling back? And it can be such a tricky place, because if that's personalized and not accepted, of like, yeah, beautiful, it's great, this is coming up, let's slow down and meet it. If that yin part doesn't happen, if that feminine part doesn't happen, it just recapitulates, both sides feeling the pressure to not be there. Like the yin part doesn't get space on both sides. Because then, and I know, my version isn't as romantic as the way that you eloquently described it, Chris, but the way it would be in the reality that I have now with gardening. But what came up when you were sharing was like, oh, right. I remember when I was in my 20s and it was all about the yang. It was drugs. And okay, I'm doing these drugs and ecstasy and it feels so good. And anyone who's done drugs has probably had the experience of, oh no, the feeling of the drugs is going down, more drugs. And then pile on more drugs, trying to chase that peak, that pinnacle, that experience of euphoria. And then it's really depressing when it doesn't do it. The more drugs doesn't lead to more and bliss. And then the other version of, which I see so often with men, this was me in my 20s also, like you named, Chris, the pornography piece. Oh, receive the stimulation, receive the energy that yang way provides, but then it also loses its charge. It doesn't work. So then it creates this like gnarly shadow part, which no shame if you're there and you're listening, but it's building the relationship to the yin part, because that part does have limits. It's incredible when it's integrated with the yin, but just exhausting and following, oh no, that part can't be here. Oh, that means I need that impulse of more porn, more stimulation, more masturbation. Oh no, just exhausting energy on the masculine side. It's really disheartening. Of like, oh, this isn't actually leading to more pleasure and connection. And so I love this conversation to bring in that beautiful nourishment of the soil and bringing in the nourishment of, when these parts come up, and it's not just, this isn't gender specific. It's not like when a woman's all of a sudden feeling, it's like when both partners or however many people are involved, when something emerges, having the subtlety and the nuance and the attunement to welcome it. Like, what is it inviting?
Yeah. And just to orient for any of you couples out there who, this is the classic thing. You had really good sex for a time, right? And then, over time, it's like, oh, well, now we're not having sex as much and it's not as exciting. And every once in a while, we have this beautiful, epic sex and then we don't. I mean, if we're orienting from just a yang perspective, in some ways, that's inevitable as we're together longer, because if we think about a nervous system regulating, and there's two people and our relationship is coming into greater and greater regulation. At first, a nervous system is just like, yeah, a sympathetic charge, but as we grow our capacity for love, for presence, and we expand our nervous system, a regulated nervous system has to have room for all of it. It has to have room for connecting in the slow dorsal places. It needs to have space in the in between. It needs to have space for the sympathetic. And that's what builds a regulated whole nervous system. So if we're thinking about a couple, if in our sexuality there isn't greater and greater space for more and more regulation of all these places, then it's a little bit like we're trying to function in pleasure with like half. It's like half of what could even be possible. And then we are going to start pointing the fingers and blaming. And then this is where you get to be allies in, hey, let's build our capacity for pleasure and the terrain. And so I'd love to hear about that from the two of you, about pleasure in relation to the yin experience.
Yeah, this would be a good time to talk about eros in the way that I define eros. And so, creative opportunities to refine it for yourself would be something that I would encourage. But the experience that I'm having right now, I feel erotic energy in the same way that I experience chi or life force or vital force. It's that I'm so full up with this experience of self and life and my deep belonging to life that I'm overflowing with this ecstatic love of self, of other, of my opportunity to be in a human body and experience all of it. And so when that becomes like the place to move from, where you're holding a container for that to fill up, the nervous system tone needed for me to develop to a space where I could hold the capacity to fill up more. My own masculine container needed to get clearer. I associate often the nervous system with a masculine element because so much of our nervous system is here to keep us safe. And so it's got this masculine sort of nature to it, which is like protect and provide for this vessel, this woman's vessel. My masculine nervous system has adapted to do that. And when I work with women, and this was the experience for me too, when I'm in the world and I'm in achieving mode and I'm spending a lot of time outside of the cave and the experience of filling up my cup, I'm using that energy and I'm going out into the world with that energy. It can be sometimes enticing to get into the pattern of that being life and forget that actually life is about this abundance of the yield. You go out and you do that part in life, but it's really not for that part. It's for the restoration that occurs as a result of being able to experience, oh, I am safe. I can feel this filling up. I can source safety, see it around me, and then say yes to it. And what I see more often than not is that container for saying yes has been conditioned for women to be tiny, 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 and that you're too desirous or too hungry or too much, or, you're just so overwhelming in some way. And somewhere along the line, and it seems like many women adopted this idea of like, oh, too much is not good. Too much is not worthy of love. Too much takes up too much space, too much time, and is a burden in some way. And then in dating women, what I discovered is like, oh, I get to be the one that's the protector and provider at times. And often I would still have the same response from women where it was like they were closing. And I wanted to show up for them so badly and so much, but they were closing. And so that was super healing for me to be like, oh, I don't need to close. I don't need to say that's too much, or I'm too much. I can be patient with this. And in fact, what's here is safe and it is devoted to my pleasure. And I've been the one that's being like, oh, I don't want to take up too much time, or like it's taking me too long, or I was going into the masculine story that I had adopted. So in repatterning that, it can be helpful to just kind of like look at it like filling up, and looking at it as this opportunity to hold more and to say yes more. Yes, please. Thank you. I will receive. And in what ways can I experience more and more of that? And sometimes it just takes a bit of patience. There's a bit of a cyclical nature. And I feel like Chris does a really beautiful job of describing like the cyclical nature of being the space holder. And then another way of looking at yin or describing this is, rather than me focusing on everything else, or maybe when it's my turn to talk, or maybe when it's my turn to interact in some way, my only focus becomes, what am I noticing in that filling? What am I noticing in that erotic energy? And what is the erotic energy showing me? And can I give myself permission to be fully present with that if somebody is with me holding that container, in addition to my own container? And the valor that it takes to keep saying yes to that and taking the time, and then also to give myself permission of like, I have no idea what's going to happen when that energy starts to move. It might sound like animals. It might be shaking. It might be crying. It might be something that I really don't want to happen, but that there's a purity to that. And when it's like allowed to move, the outcome is ecstatic. The outcome is this like awakening ecstasy that once you've had it a few times, you realize like, oh my gosh, we're supposed to live like this. This is actually what it means to be human. So it's such a gift to give somebody the opportunity to provide for you that experience, and to be willing to say yes to it. Yeah.
Love that. I'm curious in that piece, what from your guys' lens gets in the way? Because it sounds so nourishing, even as you describe it. What gets in the way of people going there? So my sense is there's a lot of wisdom in people's bodies, that there is a biological piece that knows it maybe needs it, but what gets in the way? What stops it?
How long do we have? No. 10,000 plus years of human conditioning, at least. No. One thing that I think Sarah was pointing to there that's really important to name for those who are more of a yin disposition, particularly women, but not exclusively so, is they've been entrained to be oriented to the other. So to please and or perform, typically sexually. And as soon as that's happening, that's already a disconnect from whatever the organic yin impulse is.
Mhm.
There will be pleasing that happens for the yang. There's plenty of pleasure to be had all around, but it actually requires a bit of a fasting from this entrainment or default conditioning, and then a period of reorientation. And everybody can, and we've trip over our own feet and step on each other's feet, and that's part of it too. It's okay. It's really being super gentle and compassionate with ourselves and each other and couples. We're all trying to undo a long history of being pushed in one direction, and really unwind and unlearn that, and relearn or reconnect with something that's more organic to our being. So even what seem like small wins are to be really cherished and honored in this approach, because they're actually huge. They're not small. So the performance pleasure piece is a big part of it, because that's immediately creating some dissociation, more overt, or as the process goes deeper, subtler and subtler layers of that kind of numbing need to become unwound, and then feeling comes back. So yang is external, it's directive energy, and we might call it more immature or sometimes shadowy form. Yang will have an outcome agenda oriented expression. It will feel pokey. It will feel like things and people and experiences are means to another end. And the obvious thing here in terms of sex is that the goal is to get to orgasm or ejaculation of a climax of a specific, you're supposed to, create all this intensity, boom, climax, peak, and then it's all denouement after that. And that creates this pressure and this tension that we've been speaking to, that people and the whole sexual realm becomes a means to another end. Not in a yin approach, the only agenda is deeper connection, deeper intimacy, pleasure, and love itself. And so if that means holding hands, and that becomes this really beautifully erotically charged experience of deepening intimacy and connection, then success. If it means eye gazing, if it means almost kissing but not kissing, if it means breathing together, if it means hands on each other's hearts. So there's this whole, now the zones of possible experience and levels of potential intimacy, all of which are whole and good unto themselves. And we're no longer in this kind of video game thing where like, I gotta beat the boss and get to the next level, and how do I get her, wanting to go to the next thing, and okay, now she's going this, okay, now I do this. Like, it's not mechanical. It's not, people aren't robots and machinery to be operated. They're human beings. And it's disconnecting us from listening to ourselves and to each other as to what's actually wanted in the moment. So yang, when it becomes more mature, it's still outward oriented, but now it becomes, as Sarah was saying, it becomes enveloping and encompassing. So it goes outward, but then it kind of becomes, it has its own, integrates its own yin and becomes a lot more circular. And so the yang in this approach, whether it's as one is working with your own sexual energy and becoming intimate with yourself and or with partner or partners, if there's a person, the yang person is holding the space and they are setting the fundamental tone, and they're pervading the space with their presence and their fundamental attention. They need to be radically present, not distracted, not have some other agenda, not trying to get to go somewhere else, but just to completely be glad and enjoying and feeling the sweetness of whatever's actually happening. And then yin, if yang is external oriented, yin is internal oriented. And so it's right there on the word yin, in. So when a yin feels truly safe, and when it's slowed down, and when it is clear, not just with words, but with actions that match, that there is no agenda, there is no push, there's no other goal trying to be reached other than more love and pleasure and joy and connection together, then they will start to feel the yin tidal pattern in their being. It's still theirs whether they choose to surrender and melt into it or not, but they'll start to feel the tide shifting. And particularly if, like I said, I was saying, daily life involves whether it's taking care of kids, work mode, and they're in kind of go, more yang oriented disposition. You can't just flip a switch. All right, a couple kisses, she's ready to, they're ready to just flip. He, she, they, no. Like, to really shift energetically into a sensual, more sensory, erotic sexual energy, if one is more yin and they've been in a yang mode in their daily life, it takes time to transition. It takes a massage or some gazing or some meditating together or whatever it might be, so that they feel that there's a fundamental container of love and unconditional appreciation and witnessing of their being. like complete, deep, true, actual safety. Not there's another agenda or there's how can I get the second base? None of that, but like truly safe. And then this primal force of yin, which is very tidal, starts to gently start moving in their being. And they have a choice at that point whether they want to choose to like start going inward and melting into it. And to the degree that they do, there will be deeper feeling that will come online. Sometimes it can go from laughing to crying, back to laughing to, like Sarah was saying, animal noises, deep sensual experience. It can sometimes be sweet and they just want to be nuzzled and cuddled and someone to hold them and tell them how beautiful they are and they want to fall asleep in that. Their path for the yin is to be willing to continually go inward. Because as they do, as Sarah was saying, inherent to their experience is ecstasy. When you dive down deep enough into the yin, if it's slow, if it has the proper support, if it has the right love, if it has the right container and safety and trust, they go into ecstasy. Not an ecstasy. Literally, the word ecstasy means out of yourself. So technically, we should probably call it ecstasy, but nobody says that, and that's a weird word. But
Made up a word.
Ecstatic. But normally, people's idea of ecstasy is like, out of their minds and, bliss out and all this kind of language. But in this case, they're kind of blissing in. They go deeper and deeper into their bodies and in a more regulated and contained way, even while it still gets really primal, they start actually experiencing the native endogenous ecstasy of their own being. And the yang at that point, if we're talking a couple, then the container even needs to get stronger because they're going to get wilder. The yin's going to get wilder at that point, more primal. And that means it just needs to be more and more fundamentally present and more there. And it's really breathtaking. And when the yins go within, they become immensely magnetic. They become super adorable and alluring, and they start getting really shiny. And then they will start to pull, in a partner example, they'll then pull the yang toward them in some way, either verbally or non-verbally. But it will be obvious and it will be very consensual and it will be very enthusiastic. So it checks all those boxes. It's not like, well, maybe it wasn't totally, maybe, I don't know. It's a really clear yes. And if it's not a really clear yes, it's still in the process of potentially moving in that direction. Because yin, after all, is a receptive energy. And so when it lights up, it wants to receive. It wants to receive love. It wants to be deeply beheld and pervaded. And so that is kind of a way of starting to experience the potential of the arc of how this can go. And there's many more parts to it, but just to give again a vision of like, there's a whole other way of doing this. If we're thinking classically in terms of like stereotypes, particularly for like heterosexuals, it's like the guys are the horny ones, and then the women are like, oh, do they or do they not? And then, well, but if they do, they'll get a bad word said to them. But if they don't, they'll get a different bad word said to them. So they're in this like damned if they do and damned if they don't place, which is terrible and awful. And it turns out if the yin's actually given the space, anybody who's yin, really any human being, anybody is capable of insane levels of erotic desire, just to be real. The spectrum and the bandwidth of possible longing and ache and tendency towards pleasure and ecstasy is off the charts compared to what people have for maybe normally or maybe never experienced.
Yet I just almost feel like painting, thank you, Chris, is so beautiful. I just feel like painting a little bit of a picture of, an example of what this could look like, like Mike and I have had so many experiences where he just holds his hand over my yoni, like not even touching, just holding it. And the amount of pleasure that I end up having for like half an hour, just deepening, just from that, right? Just from his hand being held with like us doing some practices and then moving into that. And just like, it's a whole different kind of pleasure than if he was penetrating me, and it opens up this whole other gate, or just holding his finger inside of me and just not moving, and the amount of orgasms and presence and which is so counter to what we've been taught. So I'm just like mapping this a little bit of like to the nth degree of how non-yang it can be, and then how much energy can be unleashed. And, for me in my body, what it almost feels like is when the yang is more still, the yin gets to take up that life energy space, but it feels so met by the yang, like it feels so held and met in that presence. And one thing I wanted to share just about how you described the circular energy of the yang. I love how you said that, because I've recently been walking around and I was telling some women, I'm like, okay, I'm having amazing sex and I feel like I'm walking around with this like energy field around me now. It's almost like then when I go out in the world afterwards, I'm so filled up with this sexual energy from the yang that it's like even when we're not being sexual anymore, there's literally like a force field around me, a circular energy that I'm walking around with that's like fortifying me, which again is so a flip from like what I was conditioned in, which is if I have sex, it's actually going to take my energy. Like it's going to deplete me. I'm going to be tired. Like, oh, do I have that to give? And then I'm like, wait, could we have sex every day? We did it recently. We did a 7-day sex challenge because we have a toddler and it can be tricky. And we're like, let's do a 7-day sex challenge. And it was so good for me because we were doing this kind of sex. I felt so filled up. Then I naturally was like, I want to do that again today, which of course does not happen if I'm expected to show up in this other way. There's no way that I could have sex every day as a mom of a toddler at 8:30 at night, But if I know I'm going to get charged up and have this space and then leave actually feeling more alive and more charged, that is a whole other ball game. Yeah.
Which is beautiful and so important to almost put words to the piece of the roles. And I love, that receivership of it and what gets nourished by it. And, to bring this into practical and this piece of the presence, it's so important, I have found, to understand the relationship to the role of offering over the presence of it's not just a finger in there. It's,
yes,
it's not just my lingam in there, just without friction. There's the presence part is so important because just doing the step without what you name there, Chris, of like noticing and working with that internalized agenda, like deconstructing the patriarch that lives inside, the muscle building is, oh, okay, great. We're going to do just resting my lingam in there. Okay, cultivating presence. What does that look like for me? What's been really juicy on the providership of that piece is getting to notice the pleasure of actually shifting that focus that's programmed to have an agenda to, whoa, deeply get to notice what's happening and now play with the energy to see how much of this I can feel in what she's experiencing, but then also like, what does my biology do in that level of presence? Like without friction and movement, can I actually penetrate with presence and energy and imagine sending waves? Like that's what's been fun for me is like, okay, now I'm going to like, if my lingam's just sitting there and I'm not thrusting, which I really enjoy, I'm going to see if I can radiate as much energy as I can up through into all those spots. And it's not with agenda. It's just like, how much energy can I allow to ignite in this level of presence, and then see what happens. And then it becomes fun in building the tone of it. Because really what I would put words to is it's attunement, how to attune to the other, but not abandoning self. Because I think this is the part to deconstruct. I think a lot of people listening to this, I know for me, my past self would have been like, yeah, but what about me? Like, if I'm not doing anything and there's no friction, like, and I'm just supporting, there's that narrative that is like, I'm just offering. And oh my goodness, no, there is such a receiving in holding the role of presence and offering. It's presence. It's presence with the nature that is this being. It's not, oh, I'm only giving for her to receive. That's a really important piece. Because
Does it create pleasure?
oh my God, so much pleasure. I get to sit, I think Sarah and I, we had an audio about this and you laughed, is my relationship to it is I get to be Shiva sitting front row to the Shakti just exploding with pleasure. That is like, talk about pleasure, talk about power, talk about fulfillment. So many of these things, when I look at this part of myself, that in the doing, in the penetrating, what I'm wanting to achieve is to feel fulfillment, to feel deeply connected, to feel the pleasure of what I'm offering received. Well, this gets to be the place. Like, oh my God, is it ever pleasurable being like, wait, I don't have to do a whole bunch. I get to just be the presence and watch you just unfold.
Which is especially helpful when we're tired,
gosh.
Or when it's like late at night, and right, it's helpful for that. Because, there can be this story like, oh, if he's tired and I'm tired, well, but in this way, that's okay. What's like a juicy, restful way that we can be, and actually it evokes a bunch of pleasure, and it's not requiring us to like go full out,
Which is sure surprising for that little voice in the head with the clipboard and has so many opinions about how everything should be. It's like, oh. It's like that little voice in there. I see this image. He puts his clipboard down. And he's like, this is juicy. I'm paying attention.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll shut up for a bit.
I love how you shared though the part of the voice that comes up that's like, what about me? I really like the friction, and like, I don't know, because there can, and I just want the listeners to understand it's completely normal to have a little bit of an arc where you're learning how to build presence in your body in a new way that maybe you've never been given the opportunity to. And the initial phases of that can be like, I don't feel anything. I don't feel anything. This sucks. I want to go back to what I know. And I kind of parallel this to any time I've taken like sugar out of my diet for a period of time. Yes. And initially I'm just like, I just want sugar and everything. I can smell it. I can tell other people have had sugar and I just want sugar. And then gradually my body moves away from that addictive pattern of the sugar solving the problem in the way that it did. And a yam tastes like the sweetest thing I've ever eaten in my life. And it does just take a little while. I think that it can be so helpful to understand that the initial phases of a rupture or an experience of shame or embarrassment, it's just the first step. There's other steps after that. And the other steps after that, if you're willing to be present and go slow with them, are so good. And it usually is so much more of that less is more part, right? Of just like showing up, bringing presence. That's all I need to focus on. If you're a masculine, you usually like having something where it's like, I'm good at focusing. Here's one thing I can focus on. I can focus on my penis. That's it. That's all I have to do. And just wait for whatever's going to unfold. That's like powerful. It's incredibly powerful. And you likely will meet some of your performative conditioning, some of your own inadequacies, some of the relational patterning that you have. What if we made a space for that? What if that was like, it's okay, that can be here. This is new. That can be fun. We're on an adventure. And it doesn't need to be, and this is like really big, it doesn't need to be that sex is like in one room in the house, only when we're naked, really in the way that we've maybe thought that it is. It actually can be a big part of every element of your life. And so that's more where I feel like Eros can be so helpful, is like I can make an experience of a meal a full erotic immersion and meditation, or like the gaze between a partner or a friend, or, there's like many, many, many opportunities for us to bring Eros to all dimensions of our life, including running our businesses and the way that we interact with people on the street. When we bring love to an occasion in its expression of I'm full of love and here is more of it, that leads to just more beauty in the world. It leads to more safety in the world. It leads to more curiosity. It leads to more creativity. It's really, really lovely experience.
Yeah. And I love this, that's so juicy. God, I love this topic so much. Um, yeah, thanks for sharing that piece, Sarah. And something I'm curious about. So when you opened with the piece that you were sharing about Chris, is you named like if you're more of the yin oriented being, and then the description of this terrain, I'm curious to hear about the role reversal. Like, what comes up for you guys around, is that more of the nature of how it is in that partnership, or is there a place where the role of being in the position of the one holding the yin and yang, like, does that switch, and how does that look?
There are switches. Yeah, they are a thing. they And it really depends on each person. Maybe speaking kind of generically, I think most people probably have like a primary, like just speaking for myself, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but it's clearly 80, 90+% on the yang side. And then there are other people who seem to be much more fluidly able. We all have yang and yin within us. So, and when we're talking kind of sexual essence or erotic essence, again, that isn't necessarily to be conflated with how one is in other dimensions of their life. They might be, but there's plenty of people who might be full on boss, directive. They like really, can really give her on a yang side, and then sexually they just want to be really, really yin, and they just want to curl up and have someone hold them and pervade their being. Like, that's totally fine. Um, and that isn't gender dependent, and that isn't sexual orientation dependent or any of that. You can have a straight couple where the woman is primarily the yang and the man might want to be the yin, because they're poles of energy. They're all within us. So it's more just in terms of sexual essence, does someone more primarily want to be in the space of the one melting, or is someone more drawn to particularly being the one who's beholding? And then, they can always switch every time, or you can, the old joke about like you buy 10 ice creams, you get the 11th one free. Like, it doesn't have to be that you have to throw everything out in order just to do this style. But there is something to be said for, because as we've been saying, the conditioning has been so one-sided. There's usually a time that's needed, as Sarah was saying there, of reorienting and giving some contrast to actually really feel the contrast. And then there can be all kinds of fun in betweens and mixtures and mixing your flavors at that point. So it's definitely not, it's meant to extend the palate, not to diminish.
I think it's such sorry, go ahead.
No, that's good. Yeah.
I think it's such an important piece to put words to, because, in so much of the niche, when it's my individual, we have our together stuff, but in my individual work, there's been a lot of positions and places where I've seen men pressure themselves to be in the role that actually doesn't match the nature, and it actually impacts the polarity, because it's like, well, I have to do this. Like, how I've watched this play out is hearing men describe, I have to perform, I have to be erect 100% of the time, I've got to, and then it ends up being the thing where they're premature ejaculating all the time, they can't hold it. And what I just want to highlight, for anyone listening, is I really hope that there's an invitation to explore something different, to soften the edges of whatever that program is that's unconsciously running, to experience maybe what's been lost is an authentic, organic orientation to a different experience. Maybe it's actually being in more of the yin role. And maybe that doesn't mean all the time, but maybe it means for a period of time to heal whatever the material is there. I know for me, I've been in positions with Courtney where I've had to be in the yin role to resolve some sort of developmental trauma, or, being molested as a child, or something where my body actually had to be held for my system to shake out the thing that I wasn't giving myself permission to like slow down and process. And so just naming there's no like this or that. It's like in a box. I love this terrain we're in because it's more permission giving to be curious. What in this nature, what in this dynamic is being invited, like in the experience, to find more of that.
And just to name, right, Mike and I are describing like developing the yin terrain, but we're both really good yang lovers too.
Oh, yes.
And we like a good yang sex.
Oh, yeah.
And that's part of our energy. That's part of when you look up our astrology, the first thing it says is you will have good sex. You have good sexual chemistry.
Great.
And so we have actually had a lot of that, and that hasn't been a problem. But this has widened what we get to experience together. And it infills, like for us, what this has done, it's not that there was a problem to fix. It's that it's allowed us to use the sexual container as a resource in all the ups and downs of life, in all the moments of like, oh, well, in this moment, this is what's happening. And so what does sexuality look like in this moment? And allow sex to be this really beautiful place to meet each other no matter what's going on in the ups and downs. Yeah.
Yeah. And it does, another way of speaking about this, which is very parallel to your listeners and a lot of the work that you guys do, is if I say to you, Mike, I want to ask you a personal question about yourself. How do you feel about that? You need to go into yin to discover how you feel about that. I'm the one that's directing you into it. I'm the one playing the role of the yang that's guiding you into that. And then you reflect in, how does that land for little Mike? What is going on in Mike's emotional environment when Sarah asks me this question? And so I love how you were naming that part of like, sometimes we could encourage ourselves to ask, like, am I full enough to hold space right now? And maybe I'm not. Am I full enough to really show up for you? And maybe I'm not, and that's okay. But if you're going to bump into your performative experience, what might happen in that is like, no, I'm fine. And then yin, and this is where it's like so great. We're so intuitive. We're like, he just lied to me. And now we're getting like disconnect, right? Like we don't cognitively catch a lot of this. Somatically, we're reading each other with so much, that word you used earlier, attunement. And we're trying to make connection. But if we can't authentically make connection because it hasn't been safe to do so, because I'm so in that I need to be this way, then we get static. We get this kind of bumping into each other and hurting each other's feelings. And so it can be really helpful to do a little role play where yin, feminine, plays the role of yang and leads and guides a little bit. And maybe she gets a little bit of an appreciation for like, whoa, this is actually really hard to do. I could have more patience with him. Holy cow. And then for it, to switch that and have a masculine go into like, no, your only job for the next hour is to completely follow and track your pleasure and advocate for your desires and your needs, and to stay hyper focused on that and then see what arises. And what arises is the truth of our being, where our deep desires and our inner innocence of our childhood is in its purity. So sometimes what comes up with it is like those shadow selves, those inner child selves that are like, and if you take that personally, it's actually a really sweet occasion to see the truth of somebody's inner desires coming out. It can be overwhelming to have your inner desires come out and then speak to them and realize like, I didn't even know that was in there. Like, it's a humbling and sweet experience, all of it. It's got shame built in. It's got these experiences where there's a density at times, or there's a lightness at times. And so it can be really nice just to allow one another to recognize that yin and yang happen in different ways in the way we relate to each other, or the way we are relating to ourselves, and to get a bit more conscious with that, and then to invite that to be a bit more sort of playful. Yeah. And that's what we want to do in our workshops, is make more space for people to explore what that could look like with slowness, with patience, with like Have you guys ever done this in retreats where you just like do dyads, where you just like stare into each other's eyes, and like for 3 minutes you're just staring into each other's eyes, and for the first minute you're like, I'm nailing this, and then the second minute you're like, we're up to 10 minutes for sure by now, and then the last minute you're like, I think their timer must be broken. Like it's just, there's a big journey in silence and presence often just to come to that space. I sometimes parallel it to like when you're driving on the highway and then somebody puts like a school section somewhere in the journey and you're like, I cannot be driving this slow right now. It feels like I could walk faster than I'm driving right now. But it's that just perspective shift when we're going at a certain speed, when we're used to being a certain way, and then we try to experience a human experience different. It feels awkward or strange. And so, yeah, it's really lovely to make a space to workshop that, make a space to workshop that in a playful way that is really fulfilling.
Yeah, that's so much of what we end up doing in our online community with couples, right? Because we do practice, we always have practices, and so much of it is actually the couples slowing down is the first thing, right? And then we bring in whatever the practice is, but it's very yin, slowing down, noticing, being with, and it's the slowing down is the first step to the new thing. It feels, I feel this like, oh, I really want you to speak, Chris, to the temple piece. Because it feels like this piece that is maybe gives more of a practical map a little bit for people about what we're just like some people might still be like, okay, but yin, like say, like what? And I feel like the temple analogy is a good way of sort of bridging people into like more of a felt sense and a metaphor of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. So, as Sarah was saying, the process is when presence is brought in an embodied way, what we're doing is resensitizing our being. And so, a huge part of this process for everybody involved, whether they're on the more principally yang side or the yin side, or they do a little bit of switching, the whole point is that we become more and more sensitized to how sensual and erotic we are as human beings. Eros, again, is a bigger circle that includes sexual. Sexual is a huge and very important part of it. It's not the whole circle, but so is creativity, so is the juiciness, the strawberries and the yams, and the colors get brighter and the birds' songs are crisper. Like life is just more delicious and yummy and alive. And that's going to be for anybody in this process. When we focus it more for the yin, the beauties are there for two partners, whether they're yin or yang, in slightly distinct ways, but it's actually to the good of the whole. It's for flourishing of all. So, one metaphor for that is a temple. This is a sacred religious place, a sacred site. And usually, traditionally, those temples have first a space of what you might call an outer courtyard, which is outside the walls of the out. So there's a temple, there's the walls that will create an inner courtyard, but then there's usually gardens or some kind of outer space. And if we're in an agenda oriented or an outcome oriented mode, is like, oh, I got to get through this wall. I got to get into the temple. I got to, get in there, see what. And instead, in this yin, every zone of intimacy is whole and it's good unto itself. And any one experience is not an assumption about what will happen next time. Oh, well, last time we did this thing, so this time it must mean we're doing that again because that was great. And it's like, no, that was that experience. This is this experience. So being in the outer courtyard might mean things like flirting, like actually taking in the eyes of someone, like telling them how lovely they are, noticing how if they're wearing jewelry or they're doing makeup or the way they're dressed or just something about their being, just like love them up. Like just find so many things that you can admire and appreciate about someone that you have feelings for. This is great too for friendships. This doesn't have to be sexual. It doesn't have to be, it can just be for anybody, family members, friends, collaborators. Like, just practice being in the outer courtyard of their being and honoring they've got like a garden out there, and like sit under the tree, take in the shade, like enjoy the smells, like, and say those things and praise them. For those who are more yin, they'll start to really like that. They'll appreciate being, because at some point you can't, again, this is versus what you were saying, Mike, earlier was so important. It's like, it's not just a technique. Okay, well, I've said the 10, like I did my 10 appreciations. I got my appreciation journal. I got my praise journal. Check, 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 check. If it feels mechanical, obviously, if it feels like it's a task, that's not going to land. That's not going to do anything. But if it's genuine and sincere, it's like, take it in. A yin person is always communicating a whole bunch of their being. And they just want somebody to notice and say that they're really into it. It's actually a lot simpler.
I just felt the yin part of me be like,
yeah, here's the secret, everybody. It's not a big secret. Like, they're actually very intentional of communicating their essence, and they just would actually like someone to behold it, not in a creepy way, not in an icky, pokey way, not with an agenda, but but also not to be like, well, I don't want to be pokey, and I don't want to be icky, and I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be. So then I'm just going to be kind of neutral and friend zone and be like, okay, that's nice. I'm glad you're having a nice time. But to actually like take it in and be like, wow, like you really radiate. Like you're really luminous. Like it's really sweet. And just say that and watch what happens. The reason to say that is not to gain access to the inner courtyard. The reason to do it is because it's good and it's beautiful and it creates more connection and pleasure and intimacy and sweetness. It has the added bonus of then usually inviting people into a next layer in. But again, if it feels agenda, then there'll be backup from that. If it really feels like with no agenda as much as humanly possible, just because it feels good and right and playful, that healthy detachment from the yang, detachment from an outcome agenda actually opens up a lot more permission and space and trust and safety. So inner courtyard is inside the walls, but not still inside the temple. And that might be things like cuddling or hand holding that again are not to go somewhere else, but as everybody's been sharing in a really beautiful way, just because it's a really beautiful, sweet way of being human together. Like a big part of this fasting for those who are in the stuck place or there's too much external stimulation that's leading to more numbness is to reassociate with our experience. You get to almost be like teenagers again. Like in a good way. It's like it's really fun to like make out. Like and just have that like that used to be like, ooh, that was naughty, and ooh, that was like kind of fun. And then it was like, well, now we have to have sex. And it's like it could be fun just to like really deeply kiss and like not have to quote unquote go anywhere else, but just to have that be a really luscious, wonderful offering and giving and receiving. It can be just really fun. So inner courtyard might be flirtation or hand holding, the kind of eye gazing examples. Everybody will draw their own markers. These are just some examples. It's not mine to map it for everybody, but the whole point is to make each zone become more and more intimate and erotically charged. Again, not to like, okay, I gotta get to the next level, but actually just to let every level infill, as Sarah was saying. And then there's generally a natural movement. The energy wants to move somewhere else. So then if you enter a sacred site, the first thing you do is you take your shoes off. There's a whole humility of recognizing now you might be in really more intimate and sacred domain of another being. They are the temple. You are a temple. So now kissing might become extremely intimate. massage, touch of parts of the body that aren't usually considered quote unquote the intimate parts. But in this process, since everything is becoming more sensory, the whole body becomes really intimate. Emotions become really intimate. All the way to the Holy of Holies. You can have the space inside the temple. You can have the marker that marks the temple to the altar space, and then an altar space into the Holy of Holies. And the beauty is the whole space is sacred. And sometimes, with enough trust and safety, when going slowly, get to learn because we're digesting each zone or realm of experience. We're not pushing too hard. So then touch to what people would usually consider intimate zones or genitals is a deeper form of intimacy, potentials of penetration of various kinds or oral experiences together. Those are well and deep into the temple. And when there's experiences of, like you were naming earlier, Mike, like premature ejaculation or difficulty getting aroused unless having a lot of intense external stimulation, or for women, if they have like vaginal dryness or penetration is painful because there's not enough lubrication. These are all indicators of like having just barreled into the temple. Like, go back out, try that again. Like, start over, go back outside the walls. Let's try this whole thing over and let the tension and the fire build. Yins are, as the Taoists say, a big pot of water. And the yang slowly tends a fire to slowly get that water to start to heat up to the point that over time it may become a cauldron. And at that point, they may very likely desire various forms of more intensity in terms of potentials for more intimacy or penetration, but it's not until the cauldron is, and then the experience of penetration and what we're calling yang sex will feel very, very different if it's following from a healthy yin orientation. There'll be a way different calibration to the intensity, and that can be beautiful and powerful and primal at that point. And it can also not have to go there, and it can also be in the ways you two are really beautifully exploring. It can be hanging out in the outer courtyard. It can be hanging out in the inner courtyard. It can be at the door to the temple. It can be where you take your shoes off. It can be just at the entrance. All of these zones are full of beauty and so much pleasure. And so just open up the space of possibility so radically. And then we're just looking for where yeses are. And it takes so much of the pressure worry about, oh my God, rejection, or it's going to be a no, or, oh, and did I do it right? Oh, it's like you just find where the yeses are in any one time. And over time, all these different areas that have numbed out, they all start to heat back up. And then it gets really fun.
Juicy.
I want to sing a little song, just one sentence
Right.
that I feel like just encapsulates this. I don't know if you know this one, Sarah. It's a Maria Stark song, and it goes, "A rose blooms when she is ready, when she is ready, and not a moment too soon." I just feel like it captures that energy. It's like attuning to that. Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful. God, this conversation, we could go on forever. And just want to thank you both for coming and being a part of this, and potentially just putting it out there, potentially there being another episode that we can follow into this even deeper, go into the temple even further. And we'd love to hear, you guys have an offering, sounds, I think, one or two offerings in relationship to this. So people who are listening and want to experience the work that you guys are bringing to the world, you want to speak a little bit about it and Where do they find you?
I think probably the best thing to do is in your show notes, check out our websites. There's like lots of as we release elements of what we're working on, you can find it all there. I love my email newsletter list of people. Like I give them so much because I just feel like I want it to be really good. So that's probably the best place to get like everything that's up to date. Chris can talk a bit about it. His Substack, he won't tell you this. It's so good. Chris's Substack, like it's like these mini genius podcasts of just like all of these different ways of looking at this that you can have as a little, mini experience of consciousness in your day that you can integrate and listen to over and over again. Because sometimes it's so dense that it can be helpful to hear it a couple of times. So those parts would be resources that I would say go to check out for sure. But Chris is going to be coming to Vernon in middle of August. I was hoping you guys could make it, but you're away or you're close by. So August 15th, we're offering a free Dharma talk that is really just an opportunity to kind of like, no cost, check it out, have it as a date night thing, have a conversation, meet us in person. If you're interested and you want to do the workshop the next day, then it's a series of these practices and processes. Everybody's got their clothes on. There's opportunities to debrief in your intimate conversations between the two of you, or as individuals that want to come together to practice these elements. But it's one thing to have a conversation about it. It's another to really show up and have an experience of it, and then go back into your relationship and integrate it a little bit. And we also coach people with this. So that might be women that work with both of us at the same time. It might be couples that work with both of us. And that has been just a really something that I treasure so much at this part of my career, is having a masculine to work with in this way. And the feedback that we get from the women that we've been working with is just like, it's so nice to be held by both a masculine and a feminine. I'm sure you guys get this also, where usually it's like, oh, I'm only comfortable with men or I'm only comfortable with women. But when you have both, you get these really sweet shifts in perspectives. And it's has this mother-father nature to it as well. So it can be really helpful for that. But those would be the places. And I would love it if you can come and meet us in person in August. And so invitation to all the listeners to reach out. And if you're just curious, like, even if you're like, I don't know if I'm ready to do this yet, like, I don't know if I can even talk to my partner about it yet, or I'm not even there, still reach out, like still develop a relationship with us, and we can maybe point you in the right direction, or even just like build more friendships, because that's also a lovely thing, is like sometimes as practitioners and coaches and business owners in this way, it's like it needs to go to a product or a container or something. And in my experience, it might not be now and it might not be ever, but that doesn't mean that you can't still learn and develop and build more friendships in this way. And so I used to put people a lot more on a pedestal of like, well, they've got it all together, and so I need to go heal myself enough to get to that point. And I would say that's an illusion. It's just not true. come, come and join us and make some friends. And it's really lovely. Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's such an honor to have you both.
Yes.
And it's sweet because we've journeyed with both of you in different ways. And it's another evolution of how we get to co-create. Thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah, we appreciate you both.
Oh, thank you for having us on, and thank you for being willing to share such beautiful and sweet, intimate details of your life together. It's really courageous and really sweet and inspiring, I think. So thank you.
Yeah, I truly feel like the Together podcast is just something I offer so many of my friends. I'm like, this is a great thing for you to have in your life. You guys give so much beautiful, just like generously giving to people all of these connections that you have and this information that you have. And so I'm really excited to get this one out to more and more people as well. So thank you for having us.
Yay, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Feeling that. And thank you all for tuning in and listening.
Yeah, and so we have a request. We have a special request from all of you. If this episode really resonated, if you loved it, something that really helps out our podcast and Mike and I is if you can give us a 5-star rating and maybe a comment. And we actually have a gift for you if you're willing to take the time. If you go in there, give this 5-star rating, take a screenshot, and then go down to our show notes. We have a link of a free gift, which is a beautiful meditation to help you and your partner deepen into clarity and resonance together. And that's our gift to you in gratitude for you helping out our podcast.
Yeah, so the conversations like this that are so juicy can reach more people. Yeah, we appreciate you all so much. Till next time.